The Zharan collective had always believed they were the mightiest empire in the galaxy. For centuries, they had conquered, dominated, and crushed any civilization that dared to stand against them. Their fleets, vast and powerful, moved through space like predators hunting in the dark void. They were a species built for war, and their ambition knew no bounds. The stars themselves seemed to tremble at their approach. When the Zharan turned their eyes toward Earth, it wasn't because they feared humanity. It was because they thought the humans were weak. The collective had studied Earth's history and decided it was ripe for the taking. The humans had fought wars, yes, but they were primitive compared to the Zharan. Their technology was outdated, their military uncoordinated, and their homeworld too small, too insignificant to matter in the grand scale of galactic politics. And so the decision was made. Earth would be the next planet to fall under the collective's iron fist. In the council chambers of the Zharan, high-ranking officers and strategists gathered to discuss the plan. The air was thick with arrogance, each one confident in their inevitable victory. The humans had never known peace, but they had also never faced an enemy like the Zharan. "They are a primitive species," the lead strategist Vikar sneered, looking down at a holographic map of Earth. "Their defenses are laughable. The planet is divided, its people fractured. They are no threat to us." "Indeed," another officer agreed. "Their best warships are nothing compared to ours, and we can wipe out their entire fleet before they even know what hit them." The council agreed unanimously, and the invasion was set in motion. The Zharan fleet moved through the stars with their usual speed and precision. Their ships, massive and terrifying, began to arrive at the edge of the solar system. The humans had no idea what was coming. On Earth, the first signs of the invasion came in the form of strange signals. Earth's defense systems, while advanced for a human civilization, were still no match for the stealth technology the Zharan had perfected. The signals were dismissed as interference at first, human commanders thinking it was just another glitch in their systems. But it wasn't a glitch. By the time the humans realized what was happening, it was already too late. At the command center of Earth's Space Defense Force, General Sophia Lee sat at the helm, staring at her screen in disbelief. The radar was full of blips, more than there should have been. The ships weren't just large, they were massive. Her heart pounded in her chest as the reality sank in. This wasn't some rogue fleet or pirates, it was an invasion, and the enemy was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. "General, we have incoming ships," her communications officer said, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and urgency. "They're on an intercept course, estimated arrival in 20 minutes. Lee stood, her mind racing. The defense fleet was on high alert, but it was small, no match for the forces coming their way. The humans had always been behind in terms of military technology. Even their best ships, the ones they had poured years of research and effort into, would be no match for the Zharan warships. "Alert the fleet," Lee commanded, her voice firm. "Prepare for battle. All civilians need to be evacuated to the underground shelters immediately." As she gave the orders, her mind couldn't help but replay the history of Earth's struggles. Wars fought for survival, battles against impossible odds. Her people were no strangers to hardship, but this was different. This wasn't a fight for resources or land, it was a fight for their very existence. The countdown had begun. In space, the Zharan fleet was closing in on Earth with terrifying speed. Their ships, sleek and dark, cut through the void like sharks through water. The humans had never seen anything like them, huge armored warships that seemed to pulse with power. The Zharan didn't waste time with subtlety. They knew the humans were weak, so they intended to strike hard and fast, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Admiral Korath, the leader of the Zharan fleet, stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the human planet. His 6 eyes glowed with a cold, calculating fury. He didn't understand why the humans were still alive. Their time had come. He had no respect for them, not as a species, and certainly not as warriors. "The humans will fall quickly," Korath said, turning to his officers. "Bombard their defenses, then move in with the ground forces. We'll show them the strength of the Zharan." His officers nodded, their expressions as emotionless as their leader. The order was given, and the Zharan fleet opened fire. The first blasts hit Earth's outer atmosphere, and the sky above the major cities erupted in a blaze of light. General Lee watched as the first few explosions lit up the sky. The Earth trembled beneath her feet. The horror was just beginning. "We're being hit," one of her officers said, his voice strained. "Shields are holding, but they won't last long." "Reinforcements," Lee asked, praying for good news. None in range, General. We're on our own. Her stomach twisted. There was nothing left to do but fight. As the first volley of plasma and energy blasts struck Earth's atmosphere, the human fleet rallied. The ships were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Zharan didn't expect: the human will to survive. The sky above Earth was filled with fire, the city lights flickering out as the first waves of enemy fire pummeled the planet's surface. But Earth wasn't defeated yet. The warships that had long sat idle in orbit came to life, their engines roaring to life as they moved into formation. The flagship, the USS Valiant, emerged from the shadows of the moon. It was no superweapon. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience. It was all the humans had, but it was enough. "We're not going down without a fight," Admiral Terrence Knox said from his post, staring at the Zharan fleet through the viewport. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the console. The humans had faced overwhelming odds before, but never like this. The Zharan were ruthless, precise, and deadly. But they didn't understand the human spirit. "You want Earth," Knox muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "You'll have to kill every last one of us first." He turned to his crew. "Prepare to engage. The Zharan think they can take us without breaking a sweat. Let's prove them wrong." As the USS Valiant charged toward the enemy, Knox's heart burned with a fierce, defiant fire. The Zharan might have underestimated them, but they were about to learn that humanity would never back down. The battle had just begun. The Zharan Collective had never faced an enemy quite like humanity. For all their advanced technology and vast fleet, they had underestimated one thing: the relentless will to survive that burned in the heart of every human. As their warships advanced toward Earth, they believed victory was certain. But what they didn't know was that humanity had something they couldn't predict: a weapon so powerful, so revolutionary, that it could change the course of the entire war. The USS Valiant had been humanity's pride and symbol of hope, built not just as a warship, but as a fortress in the stars. To the Zharan, it looked like nothing more than a massive, clunky hunk of metal, a relic from Earth's past. They believed it would be easily destroyed, but they had no idea what it contained. Inside the Valiant, thousands of human soldiers, engineers, and scientists worked tirelessly to transform what had once been a traditional supercarrier into something far greater: the ultimate weapon. The Valiant was no longer just a ship. It was a city, a military base, and a weapon of unimaginable power all rolled into one. Admiral Terrence Knox stood at the command bridge, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of space through the viewport. Earth's atmosphere was already darkened by the streaks of enemy fire, and the human fleet had been forced to regroup and mount a desperate defense. The Zharan fleet, larger and more powerful, had already launched wave after wave of devastating energy blasts, obliterating satellites and laying waste to cities on Earth's surface. But Knox didn't flinch. He was no stranger to impossible odds. He had led his people through battles they had no business winning. And now, as the leader of the Valiant, he knew that Earth's survival rested on their shoulders. "Admiral, we're receiving incoming fire," his tactical officer reported, his voice tight with urgency. "They're targeting our shields." "Divert power to the forward shields," Knox ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Get ready to deploy countermeasures." He had no illusions about the power of the Zharan. They were a technologically superior species, their ships bristling with weapons designed to tear apart anything in their path. But the Valiant wasn't just any warship. The humans had spent years developing new tactics, new technology, and new weapons, things the Zharan would never have expected. As the first energy blast from the Zharan fleet hit the Valiant's shields, the ship rocked violently, the force of the impact sending tremors through the crew. But the shields held. The human technology, while crude compared to the Zharan's, had been designed with one purpose: survival. And survival was what humanity did best. The Zharan fleet continued to pound the Valiant, but the ship remained defiant. Knox's hands clenched into fists as he watched the enemy fire again and again, each strike shaking the ship, but never breaking it. "Admiral, we're not going to hold out much longer," his chief engineer, Lieutenant Daniels, said urgently. "The Zharan are wearing down our shields. We need to return fire now." Knox's mind raced. They were outgunned and outnumbered. The Valiant's defenses were holding for now, but for how long? He knew the Zharan wouldn't stop until every human ship was reduced to rubble. But the Valiant wasn't just about survival, it was about fighting back. It was about proving that the humans would never give up. They had one chance to strike back, and it had to count. "Open all weapons channels," Knox ordered, his voice steady but full of purpose. Show them what we're made of." On the surface of Earth, chaos reigned. Cities burned as the Zharan ships continued to strike. The skies were filled with the smoke and debris of shattered buildings, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of the alien assault. The humans had tried to prepare, but nothing could have fully prepared them for the scale of the Zharan attack. But even as the planet was under siege, there was a flicker of hope. Deep in Earth's orbit, the Valiant had begun to fight back. Its massive weapons came to life, cannons, railguns, and missile batteries that had been dormant for far too long. The first volley of return fire was like thunder in the void. The Valiant's railguns fired with explosive force, launching rounds that traveled faster than light. The Zharan ships, caught off guard by the sudden barrage, scrambled to retaliate, but it was too late. The first Zharan destroyer exploded into a ball of flame, its hull torn apart by the sheer power of the human weapons. "Direct hit," the tactical officer shouted, his voice filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. "We've taken down one of their ships." It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The crew of the Valiant roared in approval, their spirits lifted by the sight of the enemy fleet suffering its first loss. But Knox knew this was just the beginning. The Zharan were not going to retreat. They would regroup, adapt, and try again. The humans had shown them that they could fight, but it wasn't enough to guarantee survival. Admiral Korath, leader of the Zharan fleet, watched as one of his destroyers exploded in space. His cold eyes narrowed as he analyzed the situation. The humans were proving more resilient than expected, but he was not concerned. This was merely a minor setback. "Prepare to launch the second wave," Korath commanded, his voice low and authoritative. "The humans will fall. The Valiant is a symbol of their strength, but symbols can be destroyed." He believed that the Zharan's superior numbers and firepower would overwhelm the human fleet. He had no doubts that the Valiant would be shattered under the weight of the next assault. The humans had no real chance. The invasion was almost complete. Earth would soon be his. But as the Zharan fleet readied for their next assault, Korath couldn't shake the feeling that he had underestimated humanity. He had always been told that humans were weak, primitive, and easy to conquer. But now, with the Valiant's return fire ripping through his fleet, a small doubt crept into his mind. Could the humans truly be this strong? Could they truly stand against the might of the Zharan? Back on the Valiant, Knox didn't have time to ponder what the Zharan thought. He was too focused on the fight at hand. "We've got incoming," the sensors officer shouted. Outside, the vast fleet of Zharan ships loomed, preparing to launch a devastating second wave. But this time, Knox had a plan. The Valiant wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon. "Activate the Fury Protocol," Knox commanded, his voice full of resolve. The Fury Protocol had been a last-ditch measure, a weapon that the humans had been working on in secret for years. The Zharan would never expect it. The Valiant's engines roared to life, and with a tremendous burst of speed, the Supercarrier surged forward, plowing into the heart of the Zharan fleet. The sheer force of the collision sent shockwaves through space. Human fighters, bombers, and drones shot out from the Valiant's hangars, attacking with brutal precision. The Zharan fleet, still stunned by the initial assault, struggled to regroup. The humans had caught them off guard, and now the tide was turning. The Zharan had no idea what they were up against. The battle had just begun, but already it was clear. Humanity would not be defeated so easily. The Zharan fleet, though still large and menacing, was beginning to show signs of disarray. The unexpected ferocity of humanity's defense had rattled their confidence. Ships that were once part of the unstoppable juggernaut of the collective now floated in space, their hulls scarred and torn, their crews scrambling to regain control. The Zharan had underestimated the Valiant and the humans, and now they were paying the price. In the heart of the human fleet, Admiral Terrence Knox stood before the command console of the USS Valiant, his eyes fixed on the chaotic scene unfolding outside. His mind raced, calculating the next move, but his heart beat steadily, grounded in the knowledge that humanity would not bend. Not now, not ever. "Admiral, the Zharan are regrouping," Lieutenant Daniels, the chief engineer, reported. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of awe in it. "They're preparing another wave, this one bigger than the first." Knox's jaw tightened, but he didn't hesitate. Divert all power to the weapons. They want to play hardball. Let's give them a taste of what humanity can really do. Understood, sir, Daniels responded, his fingers flying across the control panels. The Valiant's massive supercarrier form loomed large on the view screen, its once-cracked shields now flashing with fresh energy, glowing brighter as they powered up. Inside the ship, the tension was palpable. The crew knew the Zharan weren't going to let up, and the odds of survival were slim. But there was something else in the air, a quiet, fierce determination. Humanity was a species that had fought for its existence from the very beginning, and no matter how much they were pushed, they wouldn't break. Outside, the vastness of the Zharan fleet stretched across the stars like a dark, terrifying ocean. Massive dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, and smaller assault ships filled the void, preparing to launch another assault. The humans could feel it. The second wave was coming, and it would be their greatest challenge yet. "Open fire," Knox commanded, his voice low but filled with authority. The Valiant's weapons unleashed a devastating salvo. Railguns fired first, the rounds traveling faster than light, slamming into a Zharan destroyer with the force of 1,000 lightning strikes. The alien ship was torn apart in an instant, its hull disintegrating in a fiery explosion that lit up the dark expanse. "Yes," the tactical officer cried out, his fists pumping in the air. But it was short-lived. The enemy was relentless. More blasts from the Zharan fleet came in, and this time they weren't holding back. A wave of plasma energy tore through the Valiant's forward shields, sending the ship rocking violently. Sparks flew from consoles as the crew braced themselves. "Shields are weakening," the sensor officer called out. "We need to reinforce them or we'll be a sitting target." "We're not going to let them take us down," Knox muttered under his breath. He turned to his crew, eyes blazing with conviction. "We're human, we don't stop, not ever." He didn't need to tell them what to do. They were already moving, each person doing their part, working in perfect unison. This was their fight. This was humanity's fight. On the surface of Earth, the damage was catastrophic. Cities were reduced to rubble, entire sections of major urban centers swallowed by the destructive force of the Zharan bombardment. The sky above Earth had turned a deep, fiery red as the first waves of enemy fire tore through the atmosphere, leaving Earth's defenders struggling to keep up. People were fleeing, hiding in shelters, praying that the Zharan wouldn't finish what they had started. But just as hope seemed to slip away, a new force emerged. The Valiant surged forward, its engines roaring to life with a power that could be felt across the solar system. Human fighters, bombers, and drones launched from the Supercarrier's hangars, diving into the fray. They were the last line of defense, Earth's final stand. The human pilots screamed into their comms as they broke through the chaos, flying their ships into the heart of the Zharan fleet. The fighter jets, smaller and faster than the larger Zharan vessels, darted in and out of the enemy's fire with deadly precision. Each fighter was a dagger in the night, slipping through the gaps in the Zharan defenses and launching strikes that tore into enemy ships with lethal efficiency. But even with the Valiant leading the charge, the battle was far from over. The Zharan fleet wasn't going to back down. They came at the humans with all their might, plasma cannons, energy beams, and missile barrages that could obliterate a ship in seconds. And yet the humans fought back with everything they had. Every shot, every maneuver, every sacrifice they made was for Earth, for the future of their species. Admiral Knox's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Focus fire on their command ship. We take that down, and the rest of their fleet will fall apart." The Valiant's massive weapons focused on the largest Zharan ship, a terrifying flagship that was the heart of the enemy's fleet. The ship was a fortress in space, bristling with weaponry and shields designed to withstand even the most brutal attacks. But the humans were relentless. "Missiles locked on target," the weapons officer said, firing. A barrage of missiles shot from the Valiant's bow, arcing toward the Zharan flagship. The alien ship tried to retaliate, but it was too slow. The missiles struck their target with pinpoint accuracy, tearing through the shields and blasting massive holes in the flagship's hull. The flagship shuddered, its systems flickering as fireballs erupted from its damaged sections. The Zharan fleet, once so organized and disciplined, began to panic. Without their flagship, they were lost. The fleet faltered, some ships falling back while others tried to launch a counterattack. But it was too late. "Direct hit," the tactical officer called out. "The flagship's down, they're losing their command structure." A cheer went up from the crew of the Valiant. But Knox knew it wasn't over, not yet. "We've taken out their flagship," he said, his voice steady. "But don't let up. We need to hit them harder. We need to end this now." In the heart of the Zharan fleet, Admiral Korath watched in stunned silence as his flagship burned. His 6 eyes narrowed with fury. The humans had done the unthinkable, but he was not ready to admit defeat. The Zharan had faced setbacks before, but never like this. His pride, his empire, everything he had built, was crumbling before his eyes. "We're not finished yet," Korath spat. "Send in the final wave. I want everything we've got. We will crush these humans." But even as Korath issued the orders, something was dawning in the minds of his officers. The humans had proven themselves to be something more than just another species to conquer. They had become a force to be reckoned with. And though they had yet to win, the Zharan could feel the shift. The balance of power was changing. Back on the Valiant, Knox's voice was like steel. "This is it," he said, gripping the armrests of his command chair. "We take them down now or we die trying. No retreat, no surrender." The crew was ready. They would not let Earth fall, not after everything they had fought for, not after everything they had lost. The battle was far from over, but the first strike had been made, and the Zharan would never again underestimate humanity. The battle had shifted, but the Zharan were far from defeated. The first wave had failed, and their flagship had been destroyed, but their fleet was still vast, an endless sea of warships, each bristling with weapons and armor. They were not the kind to retreat, and as their enemies fought back with a ferocity they had never anticipated, the Zharan knew that the humans had only just begun. Admiral Korath stood at the helm of his remaining dreadnought, his 6 eyes narrowed into slits as he surveyed the damage. His pride, his empire, had been struck a blow, but not one they could not recover from. He had underestimated the humans once, and it would not happen again. "They've wounded us, but they haven't broken us," Korath muttered to his officers. "Prepare for retaliation. We will bury their resistance beneath the weight of our full might. Deploy the Reavers." The Reavers were the Zharan's most feared weapon, an assault force unlike any other. Vast, heavily armored, and relentless, these war machines were designed to obliterate anything in their path. Korath's officers moved swiftly, sending orders throughout the fleet. The Zharan were about to show humanity the true meaning of power. Back aboard the USS Valiant, Admiral Knox watched the Zharan fleet regrouping. The massive enemy ships were now concentrating their firepower into one devastating strike. Knox could feel the weight of what was coming. Their victory was fragile, but it was a victory nonetheless. The humans had given the Zharan a taste of their own blood, but the worst was yet to come. "We've done some damage," Knox said, his voice quiet but intense, "but don't think they're giving up. The Zharan won't stop, not until we're nothing but ashes." His crew nodded in grim agreement, the urgency in the air palpable. "We've taken out their flagship, but they're not going to back off," Lieutenant Daniels said, his fingers flying over the consoles as he tried to get a read on the Zharan's next move. "Their fleet's reorienting. They're coming at us with everything they've got." Knox looked at the tactical display. The Zharan fleet was gathering itself into a massive formation. The concentration of ships was almost overwhelming. Knox's mind raced. He knew they couldn't keep up this kind of fight forever. The Valiant's shields were holding for now, but they were being pushed to their limits. "Let's buy some time," Knox said, making a quick decision. "Prepare the Titan strike. I'm going to give them a reminder that we're not done yet." The Titan strike was a ship that had been kept hidden deep within the Valiant, an advanced, heavily modified warship capable of taking on enemy fleets head-to-head. It was humanity's secret weapon, and it was about to be unleashed. As the Zharan fleet advanced, the human fighters, bombers, and drones launched a relentless barrage of missiles and railgun shots. The enemy responded with waves of plasma fire, and the stars themselves seemed to burn with the intensity of the battle. Human ships darted through the chaos, firing at anything that moved, but the sheer size of the Zharan force made them feel small, insignificant. Then the first wave of the Zharan Reavers broke through the chaos, charging toward the human lines like an unstoppable flood of destruction. These massive machines, each one larger than anything the humans had ever built, plowed through the battlefield. The Reavers were equipped with shields that absorbed the hardest hits and weapons that could tear through even the thickest armor. "We're not going to hold them back," shouted the tactical officer. "They're too strong." The human fleet was struggling. The Zharan Reavers were unstoppable, and every shot fired by the human ships barely scratched the surface of the armored beasts. "We need the Titan strike now," Knox barked, his voice rising with urgency. "Launch it now." Far away, hidden deep within the Valiant's hangar, the Titan strike was ready. The massive warship had been a closely guarded secret, a weapon built for this exact moment. Its launch was a last-ditch effort, a desperate move that the humans had hoped they would never need to use. The Titan strike's massive engines roared to life as it blasted out of the hangar, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. The sight of the enormous ship left the crew of the Valiant speechless. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The Zharan, distracted by the smaller human ships, had no idea what was coming. "Titan strike, prepare to engage," Knox ordered, his eyes locked onto the enemy fleet. The Titan strike was a brutal creation, its massive weapons capable of delivering enough power to level entire planets. The Zharan had never encountered a human warship quite like this one, and they were about to feel the full weight of its fury. The battle intensified as the Titan strike entered the fray. It opened fire with its apocalypse cannons, massive energy beams that tore through Zharan ships like paper. The Reavers, which had seemed invincible moments ago, began to falter under the might of the Titan strike's weapons. "Direct hit," the weapons officer shouted. "One Reaver down." The Zharan began to react, but they were already too late. The Titan strike was unstoppable. Each blast from its massive guns took down Zharan ships, tearing holes in their fleets with brutal efficiency. For the first time since the battle began, the Zharan felt the sting of real fear. "Hold the line," Knox ordered, his voice fierce as he watched the Titan strike tear through the enemy ranks. "We need to keep pushing, this is our chance." The humans weren't giving up. They had been pushed to the edge, but they weren't breaking. They were fighting with everything they had. On the Zharan flagship, Korath seethed as he watched the Titan strike wreak havoc on his fleet. His officers were scrambling, trying to organize a counterattack, but the humans had taken the initiative. The Titan strike was a force of nature, and Korath's fleet had no way of stopping it. "They've activated their secret weapon," one of his officers said, his voice trembling. "We need to call for reinforcements, now." Korath clenched his fists, but he knew it was too late. The humans were not what they seemed. They had hidden their strength, biding their time, and now they were showing the Zharan exactly how dangerous they could be. "We will not lose to them," Korath snarled, his voice dark with fury. "Send in everything we've got, no mercy." On the Valiant, the battle raged on, but the humans were not faltering. The Titan strike had turned the tide, and every second of the fight was a reminder that humanity's will to survive was unbreakable. Knox knew they were only one step away from victory, but the cost had been high, and the fight was far from over. The Zharan were relentless, and they would not go quietly, but the humans had shown them something they would never forget. The fight for Earth was not over, but humanity was no longer the prey. They were the hunters. And now, the Zharan knew they had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity. The battle had only just begun, but the Zharan would learn the price of that mistake soon enough. The stars themselves seemed to flicker and dim as the battle raged across space. The Zharan fleet, once so confident and sure of their victory, was now faltering. The humans had given them a wound that would not heal, and the Zharan were scrambling to regain control. The USS Valiant, along with its new weapon, the Titan strike, had turned the tide of the battle, but the Zharan were not the kind to retreat easily. Admiral Korath stood at the helm of his flagship, his 6 eyes fixed on the carnage before him. The human tactics had proven effective, far more than he could have ever imagined. The loss of their flagship had shaken the Zharan to their core, and now the appearance of the Titan strike was like a blow to their pride. But Korath had been trained for moments like this. He would not let the humans win. He would not let them make a mockery of the Zharan collective. "Regroup," Korath barked, his voice thunderous. "We will crush them with everything we have. If the humans think they have won, they are mistaken." Around him, the Zharan officers scrambled to take action, sending commands throughout the fleet. The Zharan had a plan, a final gambit they had kept in reserve for a moment like this. They would use the gravitas pulse, a weapon capable of disrupting space itself, a weapon that could destroy not just ships, but entire sections of space. Korath knew the risks. The gravitas pulse was an unstable force, but if it worked, it would shatter the human fleet. It was their last chance to win, and Korath would stop at nothing to see it used. On the USS Valiant, Admiral Knox stood at the command center, staring at the tactical display. The battle was far from over, but the humans had made a mark on the Zharan that would never be forgotten. The Titan strike, now in the thick of the fight, was laying waste to Zharan ships, each shot more devastating than the last. But Knox knew that the Zharan wouldn't stop. They would strike back harder, and they would not give up until humanity was wiped from the stars. "They're regrouping," Lieutenant Daniels said, his voice tense. "They're preparing something big, I can feel it." Knox clenched his jaw, his mind working fast. The Zharan had to have a secret weapon, something they were holding back. He'd seen it before in the enemy's movements, a growing sense of desperation. The time to finish this fight was coming, but he knew the Zharan weren't going to make it easy. "Get the fleet into formation," Knox ordered, his voice calm despite the rising tension. "We need to stay tight. Whatever they're planning, we can't give them an opening." The crew worked quickly, the Valiant's weapons charging, its shields beginning to glow as the ship prepared for the next wave. Knox didn't know exactly what was coming, but he knew that they were running out of time. The humans had already made history by holding their own against the Zharan, but they needed to win. "Prepare the Apocalypse Cannon," Knox added, his voice steely. "This ends now." The Apocalypse Cannon was humanity's most powerful weapon. It had only been tested in simulations, and the crew had no idea how it would hold up in actual combat. But this was the only chance they had. They would unleash everything they had left. In the heart of the Zharan fleet, Korath stood tall, his eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield. The Titan strike, a weapon he had never seen before, had torn through his ships with terrifying precision. But now the humans had no idea what was coming. The Gravitas Pulse was ready. It would change everything. "Launch the Gravitas Pulse," Korath commanded, his voice unwavering. "Now." The Zharan flagship's massive engines hummed with energy as the Gravitas Pulse charged. The weapon, capable of distorting space itself, sent a shockwave through the fleet, pulling everything within range toward its epicenter. The very fabric of space seemed to ripple and stretch as the pulse was unleashed. The shockwave shot across space, sending entire fleets of human warships into chaos. The Titan strike, which had been pushing forward with relentless fire, was suddenly thrown off course. Its massive hull groaned as the ship was caught in the gravitational pull of the pulse, unable to control its momentum. It was a weapon designed to break the human spirit, and it was working. The Zharan fleet watched as the humans scrambled, struggling to maintain their position. The pulse was wreaking havoc on their ships, distorting their shields and throwing them off balance. Korath's lips curled into a smile. The humans were finally realizing the true might of the Zharan. Aboard the USS Valiant, panic began to spread among the crew. The sudden distortion in space was throwing off their calculations, and the ship itself was shaking as if caught in a storm. Alarms blared across the bridge, and every officer fought to maintain control. "Admiral, the Gravitas Pulse is pulling us off course," the tactical officer reported. "We're losing control of the ship." Knox gritted his teeth. This was it. The Zharan had struck with their strongest weapon. If they couldn't break free from the gravitational pull, the Valiant would be destroyed. "Divert all power to stabilizers," Knox ordered, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "We have to break free now." The crew worked furiously, trying to regain control of the ship. The Titan strike was still caught in the pulse's effect, spinning wildly out of control, its massive guns firing aimlessly into the void. "Damn it," Knox muttered under his breath. The Gravitas Pulse had thrown them into chaos, but they couldn't afford to lose. They had to fight back. They had to show the Zharan that humanity would never give in. "We've got one shot left," Knox said, his voice hardening with determination. "Prepare the Apocalypse Cannon. Target the Zharan flagship." The tactical officer hesitated, glancing at the readings. "Admiral, the ship's stability is failing. If we fire the cannon now, we risk blowing apart the Valiant along with the Zharan flagship." "We do it anyway," Knox said, his eyes burning with resolve. "We either win this fight or we die trying." In the heart of the Zharan fleet, Korath's smile widened as the Gravitas Pulse tore through the human fleet. He could feel it. The humans were on the verge of breaking. The Gravitas Pulse had done its work. The human ships were scattered, vulnerable, and now Korath would finish them. "Now we finish this," Korath said, preparing to issue the final command. But just as he spoke, a massive explosion shook the fabric of space. The USS Valiant, despite its damaged systems, had fired the Apocalypse cannon. The weapon, its energy glowing brighter than 1,000 suns, ripped through space, traveling faster than anything Korath had ever seen. The Zharan flagship, still reeling from the earlier losses, never had time to react. The blast hit the Zharan flagship with catastrophic force. The ship's shields exploded, and the core of the vessel ignited in a blinding burst of light. For a moment, the entire battlefield was illuminated, as if the sun itself had exploded. The shockwave of the blast sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet, throwing ships into disarray. Korath's flagship was gone, and with it the Zharan's hope for victory. On the Valiant, the crew watched as the Zharan flagship disintegrated before their eyes. The shockwave from the Apocalypse cannon reverberated through space, and with it, the tide of battle shifted. "We did it," Lieutenant Daniels whispered, disbelief and awe filling his voice. But Knox's face remained steely. The battle wasn't over, but the Zharan had been dealt a blow they would never recover from. For the first time since the war began, the Zharan had been made to bleed, and humanity had shown them what it meant to be underestimated. The humans weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The battlefield was a twisted, burning wreckage of what had once been a proud and powerful fleet. The Zharan, once a force to be feared, were now scattered and broken. Their flagship, the symbol of their power, was nothing more than debris floating in the vast emptiness of space. The explosion of the Apocalypse cannon had left a scar on the galaxy, a reminder that humanity could fight back when pushed to the edge. But the victory wasn't sweet. It wasn't over yet. Admiral Terrence Knox stood at the command center of the USS Valiant, his gaze fixed on the screens in front of him. The Valiant had taken damage, serious damage, and yet it was still operational. The crew, battered but resolute, worked tirelessly to keep the ship functioning, but the battle had left its mark. The weight of the losses, the casualties on the ground, and the fear of what was still out there pressed heavily on Knox's mind. "Damage report," he said, his voice low but steady, as if to keep his own thoughts grounded. "Shields are down to 28%, Lieutenant Daniels replied, his eyes fixed on the controls. "Main engines are at 60% capacity, but we've got the Titan strike on standby. We've lost about 40% of our fighters, and several sections of the ship are still without power. We're in bad shape, Admiral." Knox nodded grimly. "We've been through worse. Keep pushing. We're not done yet." The Zharan fleet, though decimated, was still regrouping. Despite the destruction they had suffered, the enemy had not yet surrendered. And that, Knox knew, was the most dangerous part. The Zharan would not let the humans have a moment of peace. Far across the battlefield, among the wreckage of broken Zharan ships, the remnants of the Zharan command team gathered. Admiral Korath's flagship was gone, destroyed by the humans' secret weapon. The gravitas pulse had failed to break them, and the humans had turned the tide with a vengeance. But the Zharan would not give up. They never did. Korath, battered and bruised, stood before the remains of his officers. His once imposing frame now looked diminished, but his eyes still burned with the fury of a warrior who refused to be defeated. "We will not yield," he growled, his voice filled with unrelenting anger. "We will rebuild. The humans think they have won, but they are mistaken. This war is far from over." One of the Zharan officers, a younger strategist named Vikar, stepped forward. His eyes were wide with fear, but his voice was firm. "Admiral, the human fleet is not like we thought. They are not weak. The Titan strike is more powerful than anything we've ever seen. We're not sure we can rebuild fast enough to keep up." Korath's fists clenched. "We will rebuild," he repeated, his tone cold and hard. "And we will have our revenge. The humans think this is over, but we will strike when they least expect it." The Zharan were not ready to admit defeat. They had underestimated humanity before, but they would never make that mistake again. Korath swore that the humans would pay for the wounds they had inflicted upon his empire. Back on the Valiant, Knox stared out the window of the command center, watching the remnants of the Zharan fleet begin to retreat. Some ships were still firing, but most were scattered, broken, and battered. They were running. The humans had pushed them back, but Knox knew better than to think it was over. "Sir," Lieutenant Daniels said, his voice tight with stress, "we've got incoming communication from Earth Command. They want a full report on the status of the fleet." Knox took a deep breath. He didn't want to give them bad news, but he couldn't hide the truth either. "Tell them the Zharan are on the run, but we're not out of the woods yet. Earth's defenses are damaged, and we've lost ships. It's going to take time to recover. There was a pause, then Daniels spoke again. Understood, Admiral. I'll send the update. Knox's mind wandered as he watched the last of the Zharan ships warp out of the system. Victory had been hard-won, but it had come at a price. Too many lives had been lost, too many sacrifices made, and yet humanity had prevailed. They had fought with everything they had, and they had come out on top. But there was a cold, unsettling feeling in the pit of Knox's stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Zharan would be back. On Earth, the sky was still burning. The Zharan had launched their bombardment without mercy, and the cities that had once thrived were now nothing more than smoldering ruins. The human resistance had held, but the cost had been unimaginable. Thousands were dead, and millions more had been displaced. Earth was battered, but it was not broken. The human military had already begun the long task of rebuilding. Soldiers were still fighting on the ground, retaking cities that had been under siege for weeks. The enemy might have retreated, but the scars would remain for years. Admiral Lee, who had been overseeing the defense on Earth, stood before a group of military leaders, her eyes hard with resolve. "We've taken a heavy toll, but we've won," she said, her voice unwavering. "The Zharan thought they could crush us. They thought we were nothing more than insects to be squashed under their heel. But they were wrong. We've shown them our strength." A general from the European coalition nodded. "We've won the battle, but the war isn't over. We can't let our guard down. The Zharan will be back, and they'll come in force." Lee's eyes flickered with a hint of something, fear perhaps, but she pushed it aside. "We'll be ready. Humanity will not fall, not on my watch." Back aboard the USS Valiant, Knox felt the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. The victory they had earned was not a small one, but the Zharan were still out there, licking their wounds, waiting for the right moment to strike again. He knew that this wouldn't be the last time they would fight, but the next time they would be ready. The war had changed humanity. It had shown them their strength, their ability to endure the impossible. The Zharan had learned that the hard way, but Knox knew the cost. The battle had been won, but at what price? For the crew of the USS Valiant, for Earth, and for humanity, there was no time to rest. The war was still far from over, and the galaxy had just learned what humanity was capable of. And that in itself was a victory. "We've got work to do," Knox muttered to himself as he turned to face the bridge. "We're not done yet." The stars were silent, but the war was far from over. The Zharan had retreated. For now. The shattered remnants of their fleet had disappeared into the blackness of space, but humanity's victory felt incomplete. It was as if the price of survival was still too heavy to bear. Earth, the cradle of human life, was scarred, cities burned, entire nations left in ruins, but the human spirit, as always, was unbroken. Admiral Terrence Knox stood on the bridge of the USS Valiant, staring out at the darkened sky. The stars were quiet now, the immediate danger gone, but the weight of the past days hung heavy. The battle had been won, but at a cost. The Zharan had underestimated humanity before, and that mistake would not be made again. But Knox knew, deep down, that the threat wasn't over. "Admiral," Lieutenant Daniels called, his voice pulling Knox from his thoughts. "We've received a message from Earth Command. They're requesting a full status report on the fleet and Earth's condition." Knox exhaled slowly. The report wasn't going to be easy. Earth had won the battle, but the damage was far-reaching. So much had been lost, so many lives, but the humans had fought, had won. And Knox had to remind himself that this was what mattered. "We'll send them the report, Lieutenant," Knox said, his voice steady, though his mind was heavy. "But we're not done yet." On Earth, the aftermath of the battle was felt in every corner of the world. The once thriving cities were now dark, their buildings reduced to rubble. The Zharan had unleashed their fury on the planet, but the human resistance had held strong. Earth was still standing. But it wasn't without sacrifice. The streets were lined with soldiers, medics, and volunteers, working tirelessly to tend to the wounded, to rebuild, and to help those who had lost everything. The world was broken, but the spirit of humanity was stronger than ever. Admiral Sophia Lee, the leader of Earth's defense, stood on the steps of a makeshift command center, gazing at the horizon where the smoke from the burning cities still rose. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors of red and orange, colors that felt too painful to look at after so much loss. "How long do you think until they come back?" General Rios, her old friend and military counterpart, asked quietly, joining her on the steps. Lee's face was grim, but she didn't hesitate. They'll come back. The Zharan don't give up, but neither do we. She looked back over the city where the work of rebuilding had already begun. Humanity has been through worse, and we've always fought back. We'll do it again. Back aboard the USS Valiant, Knox remained focused on the task at hand. The Zharan were gone for now, but they would return, and humanity had to be ready. The humans were survivors, resilient and relentless, and the victory they had won had already sent ripples through the galaxy. But what would happen when the Zharan, wounded but not broken, returned with more power than ever? "We've made history," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "But the Zharan won't forget this, and they'll come for us again." Knox nodded, staring out into the vastness of space. "I know, but when they do, we'll be ready. We have to be." The ship was still buzzing with activity. Repairs, communications with Earth Command, strategizing for the future. But Knox knew that the battle was not over. It would never be over, not until the last threat was vanquished. He turned to the crew gathered around the command deck. "This victory, this moment, it's ours," Knox said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But don't mistake it for peace. The galaxy has seen what we're capable of, and it's only a matter of time before they test us again. But we won't back down, we won't give up. That's not who we are." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Humanity doesn't die quietly. We fight, we rise, and we win." Across the galaxy, the news of the humans' victory spread like wildfire. From the peaceful colonies to the mighty empires, the story of Earth's defiance echoed through the stars. The Zharan had been beaten, but their retreat did not signal the end of their ambitions. No, this was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned a harsh lesson: never underestimate humanity. And yet, as the Zharan licked their wounds and began the long task of rebuilding their fleet, other species began to take notice. The galactic empires, who had once dismissed humanity as a primitive, weak species, now watched in silent fear. The humans had not only survived, they had won, and that victory sent shockwaves through every corner of the galaxy. The once proud species, with their advanced technology and unshakable confidence, now found themselves questioning everything they knew. Could they face a race that refused to be broken? Could they fight against the sheer will of a species that had, against all odds, defeated a superior power? In the shadows, on distant worlds, leaders of other species began to whisper. What would happen if the humans united with the other races? Could they bring about a new order in the galaxy? Or would they remain a threat to be crushed? On Earth, the work of rebuilding continued. Cities were slowly restored, the survivors came together, and the war-torn landscape began to heal. The people of Earth had lost so much, but they had gained something far more valuable: a new sense of purpose, a new determination. They would never forget the cost of their victory, but they would not allow it to break them. The humans had proven they were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy had been put on notice. Admiral Lee stood before a group of world leaders, her eyes steady as she addressed the crowd. "We've won," she said, her voice strong and clear. "But our fight is far from over. We've shown the galaxy that humanity will not be bowed. We will rise again, no matter how many times we're knocked down. We will defend our home, and we will never stop." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. But then a slow applause began to build, and soon it became a roar of approval. Humanity had survived, and now it was time to rebuild not just Earth, but their place in the galaxy. Back aboard the USS Valiant, Knox looked out at the stars. The battle had been won, but the war was still raging. The Zharan would come back, and other threats would rise. But humanity had proven something important. They were no longer the underdogs. They were no longer the weak. The galaxy had seen their strength, and now the universe would have to reckon with it. Knox turned away from the view and faced his crew. "We've made our mark, and we'll keep making it until humanity's place in the stars is secure. We fight for Earth, we fight for each other, and we fight because we can't lose." The crew of the USS Valiant stood tall, their faces set with the same unbreakable resolve. They were ready. Humanity was ready, and they would face whatever came next. The galaxy was no longer the same. Humanity had shown the universe its power, its will to survive, and the stars would never forget.